Hello and welcome to Designcast, a podcast where I interview a wide range of excellent guests in design and STEAM education to get their unique perspectives. My name is Jason Reagan and I use my 20 plus years of experience as a design educator to dig deep into complex issues. This podcast has one simple mission: to create a community of people around the world that are interested in design and STEAM education. Each episode, I chat with guests from all corners of the design world, from classroom teachers to authors and even to educational consultants. We discuss a wide range of topics that we feel are relevant today. I do want to ask you that if you're enjoying this podcast, please leave a review, rate, subscribe, share, or download from your favorite podcasting app. This helps the podcast get discovered by listeners that might not find it otherwise. Also, it helps me to continually define the direction of future guests and episodes. Feel free to drop by my website, www.jasonreagan.ga, to leave me a comment or to sign up to be considered as a future guest on future episodes. Also, don't forget to stop by Anchor and leave me a voice clip that could even end up in an upcoming show. Thanks for listening, so let's get to it. On this episode of Designcast, I had the awesome opportunity to chat with Natalie Kunst, who is the current MYP Coordinator at Preshil School in Melbourne. In addition to the coordinator role, Natalie is also the MYP Design, MYP Visual Arts, and DP Film teacher. We've had an awesome discussion about interdisciplinary units, working from home during lockdown, and permaculture. I'm confident that you will really enjoy this episode. Please subscribe, rate, and share this podcast. I appreciate all the words of support that have been rolling in. It's really been encouraging. If you have any ideas for future episodes or would like to be a guest, please reach out through my website, www.jasonreagan.ga, as there is a contact form right there on my website. If typing in a message isn't your thing, you can use a link to share a voice message straight on the Anchor page, and that link is listed in the show notes. For an expanded description of what we talk about in this podcast, check out the linked hyperdoc again in the show notes. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy this chat I have with Natalie. Welcome back to another edition of Designcast, and I am absolutely excited, and it's such a pleasure to have Natalie Kunst on today. I have known Natalie, for many, many years now, and I'm really excited to share her work and her story as she became an educator and what she's doing now. So Natalie, thank you so much for being here, and I am just excited to have you here and to chat about all the great things that you're doing. So can you just tell a little bit about yourself and what you're currently doing, and then maybe how you got into education?
Well, it's nice to be here, and it's nice to see you again, Jason, after many years. Yeah, I'm currently MYP Coordinator, and I'm a MYP Design teacher at a really quite unique school, Preshil, which is in the heart of Melbourne. Yeah, and I've been living back in Australia for the last 5 years. Previous to that, 25 years spent in Southeast Asia, so a one-year trip that ended up being a sort of a long journey through Thailand, Laos, and Hong Kong, and then coming back to Australia. And so, yeah, the journey to get there, I studied fine arts, not design. I studied fine arts, sculpture major. And as soon as I could, I just wanted to get out of Australia and went traveling in India and different places, and ended up living in Bangkok, actually, and working in Bangkok for 3 or 4 years teaching English, and then went and lived in Phuket, worked in hospitality sector in different areas. And then I just realized I needed to get art and creativity back into what I was doing, and retrained as a high school teacher, and then left straight away and went and became an expat and worked in international schools.
That's awesome. I mean, we met, and I think you were living in Hong Kong at the time, but I know that you've spent a lot of time in Thailand and Laos and things like that. So you started as a fine arts teacher, and then how did you get into teaching design?
Yeah, I think part of being in different schools and the need, some of the last few jobs I've had have been in schools that have been fairly new to the MYP. So I think design sort of is often a gap that needs to be filled or a new area to be developed. So actually at the moment I teach DP film and visual arts as well, and just a small load in MYP design. But as MYP coordinator, I'm quite heavily involved in the IDUs, the interdisciplinary units that we work through.
Yeah, you were saying before we started that you've been doing some IDUs right now. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, so Jason and I had a bit of a chat before the podcast, but there's, I've worked in a lot of different schools and some of the really large international schools in Asia. And I feel quite blessed to be in a tiny, quirky, I don't know how to describe it, as a progressive alternative is the tagline of the school. But it's a school that was started in the 1930s by two women, and it's set in beautiful mansions in a leafy suburb of inner Melbourne. And it's really got a unique philosophy in that it's authentically student-centred. So I've come to that school from working in big international schools, and it's sort of quite a unique experience to be somewhere purposely small. But another unique factor is that the kids really co-construct the curriculum with us, which is something that I'd always aspired to do in big schools and thought that I was doing well. And it wasn't really till I got to a small school that philosophy was embedded in the school that it was possible. Yeah, so we've just wrapped up a big IDU between music and design, and students, basically we just stand right back and we collapsed curriculum and gave them chunks of time. Yeah, looking at a central conceptual understanding. One of the things that's changed a lot for me in my practice is Lois Lanning's work. So I don't know if your listeners are familiar with Lois Lanning, but a lot of people in MYP will know Lynn Erickson. So Lynn Erickson is taking the conceptual understandings from the content and from the context, whereas Lois Lanning came along, and they're great friends, Lynn and Lois, but Lois challenged Lynn and said, but what about subjects that are process driven, such as the arts and design and HPE and languages? So now their work complements each other and they work together. So I was fortunate to do some training with them both in Amsterdam and Harlem a few years ago. Yeah, and so we started to really look at design like that, in terms of having a conceptual understanding, which is the glue to the unit, that draws on the process rather than product. Is that making sense? So it's based on the work of Lois Lanning.
That's fantastic. And I promise the listeners that we'll have that linked in the show notes, because I think folks will be really interested to see that. And yeah, we're quite familiar with, of course, Lynn Erickson's work, especially in the Asia Pacific region. It's pretty popular.
So in our IDU, we sort of let go of the music side a little bit, and we really worked on the skill of planning and Gantt charts and planning and organisation as an ATL. And then kids took the project in all sorts of different directions. So some physically made instruments, some did concept drawings for future instruments that aren't possible, others did animation, others did music videos, others did digital compositions. So yeah, we focus on the process rather than the content.
That's amazing. And to add to that, I know that when we were talking earlier, you don't provide any kind of marks or grades for students. Is that right? How does that work?
Yeah, so it's purposeful and embedded in the curriculum, in the school philosophy for a long time, is that, yeah, it's a really dirty word, is grades or numbers. So we assess using MYP rubrics, but we never give out numbers or grades to students, and they never ask for them, strangely enough. Like, there doesn't seem to be this big emphasis on the final product and the number at the end. And it seems quite, it's a school that discourages threat of failure or punishment. So if kids choose not to participate in a lesson or an activity, that's respected. And I haven't actually been in an environment that respected kids that much. Yeah, so they can opt out of a lesson, they can opt out of an activity, but it's interesting, once they have that buy-in and they have that agency and you're co-constructing the curriculum with them, they just don't.
Wow.
That intrinsic motivation.
The only thing I've ever experienced kind of like that is the personal project. And what I mean by that is in schools that don't focus as much on the outcome of the report, and obviously they focus on it, but the idea of giving some sort of mark or grade that's very, publicized and public, that's the only thing I've ever seen kind of like that. And that's amazing. So how do the parents respond to all of that? Like, how do they handle that?
I think there's a certain demographic that's attracted to the school, and people know that it's actually quite an honest school. Like, you've been into schools like I have, that the brochures, this politically correct photograph and it's so fake. But Preshil's, really, we have a lot of open days and people walk through the school and it's a little bit chaotic and it's not a conventional school, and I think people know that come in. And actually a lot of the kids that we do get are kids that have come, but probably 50% come right through Preshil from the primary school, but another 50% drop out of those more conventional mainstream schools because of relationships, because of bullying or relationships, or just not liking the rules and having to wear a blazer and a hat and all the rest.
I know the feeling. I don't want to wear a blazer or a hat.
So I think relationships are prioritized over product, which, I've worked in schools where you're just racing to, get in assessment tasks and tick them off, and that parent pressure. I've had those Hong Kong, helicopter parents. And so I think, it's a certain environment, this school, of like-minded parents and teachers and leadership, and quite a strong 80-year-old philosophy.
That's unbelievable. I'm really impressed. I want to find out more about that. But do you think that with the current situation we're in, with even parents now questioning the way we do school, do you think a model like that will be even more popular?
Yeah, I think like part of the Preshil philosophy is really it puts students in the driving seat, and I think that's embedded in everything that we do. So while we've been in lockdown since March, we've been online learning for 6 months, and we're Southern Hemisphere, so we haven't had a break. And our diploma kids have gone in at certain times, but the MYP kids have been home for 6 months. So I think some kids have just done unbelievable work. And in design, we've really focused on authentic design projects around the house. One boy did draft proofing of the house, someone else did, food-based design, and other kids constructed things in the house. And that's something, I don't know if it would work in every context.
No, that's pretty cool. I mean, so you guys are still locked down?
Yeah, for sure. 5 kilometers. We're allowed to go 5 kilometers from home.
Wow.
But that's been, in some ways, in teaching design, it's been liberating in a lot of ways, because it's removed us from the workshop. We haven't got the normal materials there. So it's really made us turn over in a new way, invited kids to really lead the unit based on what they have available to them and what's in their context.
Wow, that sounds very much like the IB philosophy of its programs in general, of having students at the center and creating these, when you think about the spirit the ATLs were written in and that sort of thing, it sounds exactly like what you're describing to me. So that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think schools have become so big too, right? So you don't realize how much of an obstacle that scale is in schools.
Yeah, there's a lot of throwbacks to the colonization days too in education, the way that hierarchy is built and things. And I think there's going to be a call from parents and everyone actually to change that as things open back up. It may take some time, but I do see that happening. But wow, that's unbelievable.
I think I'm definitely missing the school environment. Like, I've been blessed. The last few schools I've worked in have been really beautiful schools, like Discovery College in Hong Kong. I don't know if have you been there? It's designed by the same firm that designed the airport and the glass and steel, and beautiful school. And before that, at Prem Centre in Chiang Mai. So quite different design schools, but quite aesthetically beautiful schools.
So do you find that and you say this new school doesn't even I say new to you, Preshil.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like a traditional school when you walk around there. It's these houses or mansions, as you say.
Yeah, no. So the high school is 2 large mansions that are joined in gardens. So no, it doesn't look like it. Other than a little sign at the driveway, you wouldn't know it's a school. And so it has a very homely feel, and that was part of it. Initially started as a boarding house, and then evolved to become a school. So that's the high school where I work, but the primary campus down the road was designed in the 50s by Kevin Borland, who's quite a famous Melbourne architect. He really involved the kids in the design of the school, so there was a collaborative process. All the windows, rather than being up high, the windows are all down low at children level, and different parts. They have autonomy over the school. And we were talking earlier, down at the primary campus, down the back, there's a whole section, and these are kids under 12, but there's a whole section, they call it the cubbies, or the laneway, and the kids freeform build down there with big planks of wood and rusty nails and hammers, and that stuff just doesn't happen in Australia anymore with health and safety protocols. So the kids build there's platforms that are being built by the school groundsman, and they freeform build off that. But by the end of the year, like, they're 4-story high. It's an incredible shanty town of play and design, and so I think the school environment and the leadership are open to that, kids taking over and making it their campus.
That's unbelievable. It sounds like it would lend itself to the idea of design really easily. This idea of agency and using your skills that you have and learning new skills and things. That sounds really fun. Like, I have to come visit you when we're not locked
Yeah,
down and you're not locked down.
yeah, for sure. For sure. Beautiful campuses. Yeah.
So, Nat, we could talk all day about this. I want to ask a little bit about this permaculture design idea that you've been working on for a while now. And can you just
Yeah.
explain a little bit about what that is and how you're using that?
So permaculture is basically a design concept, I guess you could say, that came from two Australian guys in the 70s in Tasmania. So we all know the counterculture movement of the 70s, but we had a lot of people dropping out of conservative society and heading to the bush. And I grew up near Byron Bay, and that was one of those areas. So I was sort of familiar with this sort of hippie movement. But it also struck me, how beautiful their buildings were. And, in the area where I grew up, a lot of alternative people and living in a different way. And so permaculture was sort of a response to that. And Bill Mollison and David Holmgren came up with the word itself. And permaculture is a movement against agriculture. So there was references to farming and environmental movement. But permaculture is actually a set of principles. And so when I guess when I was living in Hong Kong, I lived a long time in Thailand and I had some land. And so I was building this. I'd seen a guy on Instagram that built a house in Thailand for $25,000. And I thought, for $10,000. And I thought, if he can do it, I can do it, because I speak Thai and I already had this parcel of land and a great network of Thai family and friends to support me. And so I started that design process maybe about 10 years ago, and I got all old recycled teak doors off old houses that were being demolished and sort of designed a passive solar house with recycled materials where I could. So I really started to think about sustainability. Just looking critically, I think, at my life. I was living in Hong Kong on the 18th floor and my food miles were through the roof. Like at Hong Kong, your apples are coming from Holland and your pears are coming from New Zealand, and nothing's made locally or grown, very little's grown locally. And I just sort of started to think about, and working for IBIN. So I've worked with you, Jason, as an educator for the IB and flying to another country once a month, which is exhilarating and exciting. But at the same time, we start looking at your carbon footprint and your lifestyle. So that was a big part of moving to Melbourne for me. And one of the first things I did when I got here is I did my permaculture designer's certificate, which was an 18-week course. And basically it unpacks permaculture principles. So there's 12 principles. They're very broad principles that you can apply to your home and garden, but you could also apply it to your classroom or your rental property or a 50,000 acre property, or you can apply it to it's basically about efficiency, I think, and systems thinking and integrated systems. So permaculture, I guess, around that time was something I was thinking about with my home environment, retrofitting an old weatherboard house here in the hills just outside Melbourne, and gardening a lot and trying to live in a lighter way on the planet. But then I really started taking permaculture into the classroom in the way that I zoned and set up materials and the way that I sourced materials, and sort of putting a little filter over everything that I did, what materials I was using in the classroom, where they came from, looking at waste, looking at inputs and outputs into the classroom and things like that. So it's not something that I explicitly teach, but I guess it's a lens. I do talk about it a bit to the kids, and I'm involved with an organisation called Perma Blitz. It's a volunteer organisation. So I'm a designer, and so people would contact us if they wanted to basically blitz their backyard or live. It might be a rental property or their backyard or a community garden or a school, and they wanted a design. So we would go as volunteers and we would connect volunteers to organisations, and it's all voluntary, and we would do up a design based on the client's needs and how much time they have and how much money, how much time, who's using that space. Do up a design, and then we would have like a volunteer day where volunteers sign up. So it's quite exciting, like I've been in the middle of winter in Melbourne and had a design and put it live on the website. Within half an hour, it's full of volunteers that want to come and help other people transform their backyard. So a lot of people living in the city wanting skills in permaculture and how to construct raised beds or drip irrigation, different ways that they can live in a more sustainable way. But also an aspect of it is the social permaculture, so the connection between people.
Wow. I've got lots of work to do to learn about this. I've heard about it for a long time and dabbled, but wow, this is
I think in America you call it homesteading.
Yeah, it sounds familiar. It's the subject of a lot of discussion now. As you're talking, I'm sitting here thinking about the design briefs and the design specifications I ask students to do. You're just describing it right there with your permablitz,
Yeah,
knowing your
yeah,
audience and your materials
yeah.
and things like that.
Yeah, I think about maybe 5 years ago, I did a workshop with Jeff Robin, who's a project-based learning specialist at High Tech High. He was in Melbourne. And something that I really took away from him was about doing the project. Like often as teachers, we're designing the assessment task and then rushing off, and he talked about whatever you were doing to do it first. And so I've really tried to build that into my philosophy, like doing the projects the kids are doing, but also, people can't be what they can't see. So living through that design process in your own life and also at school.
That sounds great. And, students know it immediately if you're faking it, if you're trying to teach something you yourself don't practice or believe.
Yeah.
I find that they definitely know immediately what's going on.
Like recently at the climate change rallies, I don't know what's happening where you are, but kids were super gluing their hands to posts in protest as part of Extinction Rebellion. So like when it gets to the stage that our young people are doing that, and so I don't know, I just feel like for me, that's one of the issues of our time is sustainability and positive solutions to sustainability. Because I don't know, like in Australia, our federal government, we don't even have a climate policy, so counterbalancing that with positive stories that empower kids to have some sort of agency.
I mean, Korea now, they're really big into recycling and to reusing things. And the Korean culture actually is quite sustainable to a certain extent. I've really learned a lot. There's no bins, there's no rubbish bins on the street. Everything's really chutes that they go into the underground sorting area, and people just garden when there's a green space and things like that. So I find that folks here, but at the same time, being that it's a peninsula, quite isolated in a lot of ways, a lot of the food is brought in, and the meats and different things. And so there are some areas where there could be some tightening.
There's a great documentary that you might want to check out, or some of your viewers, called 2040. Have you seen that one? It's 2040. It was a documentary released early this year by an Australian filmmaker, Damon Gameau, who did that Sugar Films and a whole lot of other documentary films. But it's all positive stories of sustainability from all around the globe. But it's a great one, and we started one unit with that as a provocation this year, and then went on to address sustainability as a...
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcasts. Now let's get back to the episode.
And have you gotten any of your students involved with these permablitz or permaculture things you're doing outside of school?
No, not really. That's sort of my scene outside of school. But we have a garden at school, a community garden, and we have a kitchen garden elective. So every Wednesday afternoon, we don't have sports because we're a non-competitive school. Like sports are really frowned upon. It's a bit arty. And the poor kids that love sports end up leaving and going to other schools. There's a basketball court, and that's about it. But yeah, we have an elective program. So there's a kitchen garden elective. So there's a group of kids that would look after the kitchen garden and cook some food using the ingredients. And they put on a spring dinner, a formal dinner once a year. But there's a big movement of that in Australia towards, like kitchen gardens in schools. But I do think it tends to become a primary school thing. And, the big private wealthy schools that I've worked in have sort of looked down at it in some ways. It's sort of like our old ag school being outside. But I don't know. I know from my own kids, I had 2 sons and lived in an apartment in Hong Kong, and there's that nature deficiency, I think, in a lot of kids. And we're trying to get them to understand sustainability, but they're sort of quite removed from the natural world, a lot of kids.
Totally. I mean, and actually, I've had quite a few people who work or are from Australia on this podcast. And I've done a lot of workshops and visits and things in Australia. And I've noticed that a lot of the schools do have kitchens and do have, cooking programs and things like that. And so do you incorporate any of that into any of the design or art stuff that you're doing, or is that sort of just a student-led, interest-led type thing?
Yeah, no, we did. As part of the sustainability unit, we went into the kitchen, and that was right when we went into lockdown. So we did things at home where they had to design and cook and present a meal that was sustainable, and they had to explain what made it sustainable. So looking at the food miles and the ingredients, and we spent a bit of time looking at meat and, so analysing their own habits and having like little design challenges at home.
That's cool. And that's actually a pretty good one to do when you're on lockdown, because everyone hopefully has food in their house so that they can do something, so wow. Nat, tell me a little bit about what you're excited about at the moment. What are some things? I know we're in a really weird place in our lives with this COVID stuff.
Yeah.
But what's some things you're really excited about?
Well, yeah, the permaculture part really excites me. I just think I see a lot of positive examples of people that are taking control over their life and their actions and responsibilities. That's exciting to me. Being in a small school where, you know, teaching these quirky, strong-minded kids is sort of really keeping me on my toes. And we've had 6 months of learning at home, so it's been challenging, you know, to cameras on, and we don't have any of those rules, right? So just trying to keep. I think for us, it's really when we went into lockdown, one of the first things I did was organise a Zoom call with friends in Hong Kong who'd already been at home for 3 months, and we really started off from the outset with a focus on wellbeing over synchronous all-day classes. So we've really reduced and changed how we're teaching. Yeah, I don't know, as we were talking earlier, but I'm currently in the middle of Jennifer Wattle and Marcus Liu's course, Designing for Learner Agency. So that's been fantastic to talk to those guys and really think a little bit deeper. I know we spend a lot of time in the ideation and creation stage, but I know that, you know, we've got a lot more work to do on things like empathy and taking the students away from their own experience. So that's something that I'd really like to look at, more authentic service-led design.
I agree. And I think that that's probably the one most missed thing in the MYP design world at the moment is empathy when it comes to your users. I think it's built in it's an intrinsic thing. I don't think it's very extrinsic. It's not been very explicit. So I think that adding that in as we look at how the subject continues to develop and evolve and grow, I'd love to see the sustainability aspect added in as well. But the empathy, I think, as part of that process is incredibly important because it does teach us so much about who our client is, right?
I mean, it's interesting when you have a backyard and you've got space to garden and I mean, we have great government rebates to put solar on your roof and things like we're so blessed really in Australia, and living in Melbourne, we have a left-leaning government. But I know in other parts of the world, it's not like that. So it is like, where do you start and what action do you take? Recently, I was at NIST and, you know, I was blown away. One single student, she was a Dutch Thai girl and she'd been living in Holland and came back to live in Bangkok, and she'd spent time with her Dutch grandparents on the farm, and next thing she transformed the whole roof of NIST now is an edible garden. So we had workshops a few years ago and I was doing the field rep role and I heard her speak. It was actually an interesting workshop. There was a student in each workshop, so it was a special event to give student voice. So we had a student in each workshop and she happened to be in one of the workshops and led a tour of teachers to the roof. So interesting, like if we can overcome the challenges, I think urban environments provide real opportunities.
Absolutely. Actually, a few weeks ago, I had an episode with Linda Keene who was on, and I don't know if you haven't had a chance to listen to it, you ought to go back. And she actually, there's a video that goes with it too on my YouTube channel, but she's been a design educator for almost 40 years now. She's been doing this before it was even really a thing. And she was one of the Green Roof Initiative folks in Chicago where they went in and they had superimposed green roofs on everything and things. So she's an architect and a fine artist and then a design educator with that. So she's got some great resources about that. You might want to check that out. Her website's next.cc and it's got some great things on it to do with that. And they have these things they call learning journeys. And so you click on one of the icons and then it sort of has this hierarchy that opens up for these different things students can do. And so when you're talking about a virtual environment, and actions and things, it's a great way. There's some like 300 different learning journeys and stuff. So, and I think it's really geared for your age group that you've got there at your school. So it might be a really good group thing to look at. But it made me think of that because I think looking at urban gardens and looking at here in Korea, people growing their own things in their own house is a big deal too, you know, and being able to recycle gray water and even making their own cosmetics and different kinds of things. It's really big. And so I think the more we interest our students in that, better it's going to be.
I mean, it's challenging. Like I worked in the big schools with 3D printers and laser cutters and they're just fantastic tools, but I just needed to balance the story with something else and be a bit more critical. I think, you know, when you're working in a school with a massive budget, which is what some art and design budgets are, you know, it's really hard to not jump in and you know, to be cautious and careful about, you know, what you're spending just because those students come from, you know, a position of privilege and you've got the money to afford all these materials. Is that the best solution at this point in time?
Yeah, and I think that we'll be questioning that for a long time to come. Hopefully even our students will start questioning it, you know, and
yeah.
and that kind of thing. So
Permaculture gave me an understanding of peak oil and different developments happening in the world. Gave me like a framework to talk about some things like, oh, actually, we really need to change. We need to redesign the way that we live, which sounds cliched, but it's
no,
so
no,
true.
I mean, actually, one thing I've noticed is, I've been traveling back and forth to Australia many times over the last, I don't know, 6 or 7 years. And even back in the early 2010s, I was noticing that going into a restaurant, water bottles were glass bottles that were just refilled and you had the option of tap or whatever. And that's catching on a lot of other places, but that was the first place I'd seen it kind of widespread. And I was just completely taken aback. Like, wow, this is action. This is taking action on an idea and on something to do. And so everyone takes a little bit of action. It makes a big difference, right? And so I think it's fantastic. Natalie, let me ask you this. If people want to get in touch with you to find out more about these awesome things you're doing, what's the best way to do that?
LinkedIn, probably. Yeah, LinkedIn, probably.
That's okay. I'll make sure to put that on the show notes to connect with you there. And then let me ask you one more thing. Who do you get inspiration from? So, you mentioned the documentary, these different authors and things, but where do you go for inspiration on a regular basis?
Oh, I just think, amazing colleagues that I've worked with really, over time. And actually, part of being a design teacher is I've just worked with some amazing women designers, in Hong Kong with Gil Whitaker, and really passionate food technology teachers, and Chrissy Carini in Hong Kong. So actually, I think for me, it's been, different people that I've worked with and drawn inspiration from over the years. Yeah.
Do you find that you're connecting with them more, being that we're kind of in a lockdown state of mind?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, at Preshil, we work in a highly collaborative way. So, and that extends to the kids too, actually drawing inspiration from them and what's going on in their worlds and what they're interested in.
That's awesome, Nat. I'm inspired by listening to your amazing stories, and I love to hear the journeys that everyone goes on. And at the moment, I really hope to be able to get down and responsibly fly and see you sometime
Well,
after
that's
school.
the thing too. It's tricky, isn't it? That's part of life, isn't it? So trying to learn to counterbalance that.
Maybe we can virtual meet up and do virtual tours of our spaces once things are back.
Yeah, well, actually, yesterday was Sustainable House Day in Australia, and I spent a whole day on webinars. So, people are sharing and opening up their lives in different ways that, have meant that it hasn't been accessible to other people previously.
That's cool. I do believe that people are much more accessible than they were a year ago, and being able to speak to people who you wouldn't probably have access to any other way has been really good. And so, everyone's kind of in a captive audience state.
We sure are.
So are there any books or magazines you would recommend people have a look at regarding permaculture?
Oh, stacks. I don't know where to start. Loads of great podcasts. In Australia, we have a permaculture convergence every 2 years, which is it's almost like a religious thing, but there's a huge permaculture movement, and there is all around the world. Someone who's particularly influenced me a lot, though, is Dan Palmer, who talks a lot about living. He's a young Kiwi guy who I've done a couple of retreats with, but he talks about living design processes, and he has a podcast called Making Permaculture Stronger. So Dan's quite a philosophical permaculture practitioner who sort of looks at sort of really digging into you as a human being and what sort of life you want to lead and your values, and then designing from that out.
Can you do me a favor and pop those onto our document so I can have them on the show notes?
Yeah,
that would be so helpful because I'm interested in hearing about that. And we started out this season, 7 or 8 episodes ago with one of my friends, Mr. Dunbar, and he's a biomimicry guy. He's all into biomimicry. And so I noticed that that's something that permaculture, I think, encourages as well, is looking at nature.
Definitely.
And so I'm starting to see a theme emerge, which is fantastic. So a lot of people had some good things to say about that. And then a couple of episodes ago, I had a guy that's talked about just the kind of food design stuff he's been doing with students and how he's used that with service. And so I'm beginning to see, this another theme emerge, which is awesome. So it'd be great if I can have some more resources I can share with folks and talk to folks.
Yeah, I'll pop some on and share them. But it's the permaculture movement worldwide. Yeah, so I'm sure in each city you've got a little group of people doing something.
I'm sure we do. So, Nat, thank you so much. I think folks are going to be really excited to hear about this, and I will have your LinkedIn profile linked so that they can have a connection with you. And I can't wait to catch up with you in person real soon, hopefully, somewhere around the traps where we travel. But thank you so much for being such a hospitable guest.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's nice to see another human face in lockdown.
Yeah, it is a bit scary. So it's crazy. So anyway, thank you so much, Nat. I appreciate it.
Okay, take care.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Designcast. I'm Jason, your host, and I produced and created this podcast. If you have any input, I would love to hear from you, and I look forward to seeing you again really soon.